My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 29 years old, and the worst day of my life started in a crowded office with everyone staring at me. I thought I was walking into my manager's office for a performance review, but instead, I was handed a cardboard box. And then, while my coworkers smirked and whispered, my boss said the words that cut through me like glass. "You're done here." That single moment shattered me, but it also planted a seed I didn't see growing until much later. White right pointing backhand index before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The air in the office felt heavier than usual that morning, like everyone else knew something I didn't. The sound of keyboards clicking filled the open floor, but when I walked past, I noticed the sudden hush that followed me like a shadow. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile, clutching the coffee I had picked up on my way in. It was supposed to be just another Wednesday, routine, predictable, safe. Instead, it became the day that flipped my life upside down. "Sarah, can you step into my office?" My manager, Brian, called out. His tone was sharp, and his eyes didn't meet mine. My heart dropped. This wasn't normal. I walked in, still holding my coffee, and he didn't even wait for me to sit down. "This isn't working out," he said flatly, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside was a termination notice. No warning, no second chance, just the cold end of everything I'd worked for. I froze. "What do you mean?" My voice cracked, but he didn't flinch. "You've been underperforming. We're moving in a different direction. HR is already processing your paperwork." The words felt rehearsed, mechanical, like I was nothing more than a task to check off his list. But what broke me wasn't his tone, it was the laughter I heard outside the office door. My coworkers were whispering, some of them even chuckling. They knew. They had been waiting for this. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to cry. "Can I at least?" Brian cut me off. "You have 10 minutes to gather your things." When I stepped back into the open floor, every pair of eyes was on me. Some tried to look sympathetic, but most didn't bother hiding their smirks. I carried the box they gave me, filling it with the small pieces of my life, a framed photo of my mom, a sticky note with a doodle my niece had made, the coffee mug I had used every morning. Each item felt heavier than the last. The walk to the elevator was the longest walk of my life. I heard whispers trailing behind me. "Guess she couldn't handle it." I saw this coming. Should have tried harder. My cheeks burned, but I kept my head high. If I broke down there, in front of them, they would win twice. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of them, smiling, relieved to see me go. I felt like I was disappearing, erased from the very place I had given years of my life to. The ride down was silent except for the hum of the elevator, but my thoughts screamed. How was I going to pay rent? What would I tell my family? Who was I if I wasn't Sarah, the dependable employee? When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I stood there on the sidewalk, clutching the cardboard box, while people walked past without a glance. To them, I was just another stranger with a bad day. To me, it was the beginning of a nightmare. I couldn't bear the thought of calling my mom, so I went straight to the bus stop. Sitting there with the box on my lap, I stared at the city I thought I belonged in. Now it felt like it was spitting me out. On the bus ride home, every laugh, every smirk replayed in my head. My coworkers' faces blurred together, a wall of people who had enjoyed my fall. My hands trembled, gripping the box tighter. For the first time in my life, I felt small. When I got home, the silence was suffocating. I set the box on the kitchen table and collapsed into a chair. My bills were already stacked neatly in a pile. Rent, utilities, credit cards. I had barely been keeping up with them while working. Now, without a paycheck, they looked like ticking time bombs. I stared at the photo of my mom I had packed, her smile frozen behind the glass. "What do I do now, Mom?" I whispered, but the apartment gave me no answer. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every detail. The look in Brian's eyes, the whispers, the way the laughter cut deeper than the words themselves. Anger burned beneath the shame, a quiet fire I hadn't felt before. By morning, I made myself a promise. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but one day, they would regret laughing at me. One day, they would see me again, not as the girl carrying a box out of the office, but as someone they could never mock again. That vow was the only thing that kept me standing as the days ahead got darker. The vow I made that night kept me breathing, but survival didn't get easier. Every morning, I woke up in that tiny apartment with sunlight spilling through blinds I could barely afford to keep open. The first thing I saw was the stack of bills on the counter, each envelope like a silent reminder that the clock was ticking. I picked up shifts wherever I could, coffee shops, temp agencies, cleaning offices at night. It wasn't glamorous. Some days, I wore the same pair of black pants 3 days straight because laundry money had to wait. I'd smile at customers who barely glanced at me, then go home with tips that barely covered groceries. I told no one. Not my mom. Not my sister. Not even my closest friend. Pride kept my mouth shut, but shame sealed it. How could I admit that the girl who once sat at a corporate desk was now scrubbing toilets to keep the lights on? The silence became my shield. At night, when the world outside went quiet, I felt the weight of it all. My walls seemed to close in tighter each evening. I'd sit at the small kitchen table with a notebook, calculating and recalculating. Rent due in 9 days. Power bill overdue. Minimum credit card payment missed again. The numbers never worked out, no matter how many times I tried. One evening, after an especially long shift at the diner, I came home to find a pink slip tucked under my door. Final notice, rent overdue. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the doorframe, my legs weak, the paper trembling in my hand. That night, I didn't eat. I sat in bed, clutching that slip like it was a warning flare only I could see. The next morning, I forced myself up. I couldn't collapse. Not yet. I tightened my ponytail, shoved my feet into worn-out sneakers, and went out again. Another shift, another round of pretending I was fine. But every time I passed an office building, I caught my reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, clothes that hung looser now, a face I barely recognized. The hardest part wasn't the work or the hunger. It was the invisibility. People looked past me, as if losing everything had erased me. In the coffee shop, businessmen ordered drinks without meeting my eyes, their voices clipped, impatient. Some left coins instead of dollar bills in the tip jar, like my effort was worth less than their change. One afternoon, after closing up, I stayed behind wiping tables slower than usual. The manager walked by, sighing. "Pick it up, Sarah. Time is money." His words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they echoed the laughter I still couldn't forget. I wanted to scream that I was more than this apron, more than these minimum wage hours, more than the pity tips. But my throat locked. So instead, I nodded and said, "Yes, sir." Silence became my constant. I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I just kept moving, paycheck to paycheck, penny to penny. Alone in that silence, I learned something, how much a person can carry before they break. But cracks showed. There were nights I sat on the bathroom floor with the water running, muffling the sound of my sobs. Nights when I replayed the office laughter until it became a loop I couldn't shut off. I wondered if they ever thought of me. I doubted it. To them, I was gone, forgotten. But to me, they were everywhere, shadows in every smake, every dismissive glance, every slammed door. One small incident nearly broke me. I was working a late shift at the diner when 2 of my old coworkers walked in. They didn't recognize me at first, hair pulled back, uniform apron tied tight. But when one finally looked closer, his eyebrows shot up. "Sarah? Wow, didn't expect to see you here." His friend laughed, a sound I knew too well. Guess corporate life wasn't for everyone. I forced a smile, set down their coffees, and walked away before my face betrayed me. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Every word, every laugh, was fuel. Painful, yes. Humiliating, absolutely. But deep inside, that quiet fire burned brighter. The silence outside became noise inside me. I started writing at night, page after page, not of dreams, but of plans. Small ones at first. Budget breakdowns. Lists of skills I had. Ideas for side work. Anything to keep my brain from drowning in what I didn't have. Scraping by wasn't glamorous, but it taught me things I never expected. I learned how to stretch a $5 bill until it screamed. I learned how to walk everywhere instead of paying for the bus. I learned the value of silence, not as emptiness, but as preparation. Still, loneliness gnawed at me. One winter evening, I was carrying groceries home in the biting wind. A bag ripped, cans rolling across the sidewalk. I dropped to my knees, chasing them with frozen hands, tears stinging my face. A stranger walked past without stopping. For a moment, I almost gave up right there on the pavement. But as I picked up that last can and shoved it back into the torn bag, I whispered, "Not yet." Not yet meant tomorrow. Tomorrow meant survival. Survival meant maybe, just maybe, one day I'd have more than silence. Every humiliating laugh, every smake, every shift I worked with my head down became fuel. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't boast. I let them believe I was gone. All the while, in silence, I was building something they couldn't see. And though I didn't know it then, that silence would one day become the loudest answer I'd ever give. Not yet. Those two words echoed in my head the entire walk home. By the time I climbed the creaky stairs to my apartment, my body was frozen, but my mind was burning. I dropped the torn grocery bag on the counter and sat at the kitchen table, pulling out my worn notebook. The pages were filled with numbers, rent deadlines, payment due dates, side hustles that barely covered gas money. That night, I stayed at the columns, but instead of drowning in them, I began to see something different. I picked up a pen and drew 3 simple boxes: income, expenses, leftover. For months, those boxes had been nothing but a cruel joke, the leftover column mocking me with its emptiness. But that night, something inside shifted. Maybe it was the humiliation of chasing cans across the sidewalk. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the fire I had been carrying since the day they laughed me out the door. Whatever it was, I refused to end another day powerless. I wrote down every dollar I had, cash in my wallet, tips from the diner, even loose change from under the couch cushions. Then, I listed every single expense: rent, utilities, groceries, the credit card minimums. When I totaled it, I had exactly $17 left for the month. $17 between me and nothing. But instead of despair, I felt clarity. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was planning. The next morning, I walked to the library. My sneakers were thin from overuse, but I ignored the ache in my feet. I wasn't there for warmth or free Wi-Fi. I was there for answers. I went straight to the finance section, scanning shelves of books I never would have glanced at before. Words like budgeting, investing, entrepreneurship seemed like another language. I pulled down a paperback about managing money on low income and carried it to a corner table. I read for hours, scribbling notes. The book wasn't glamorous. It didn't promise instant wealth or easy escapes, but it showed me something practical: the power of numbers. For years, numbers had haunted me, mocked me, controlled me. But in those pages, I saw how they could be tools, even allies. When the library closed, I walked out with 3 books tucked under my arm. That night, I spread them across my kitchen table like weapons. Instead of staring at unpaid bills, I studied charts on compound interest and simple side income strategies. My notebook filled with new lists, skills I could market, apps that offered freelance gigs, websites that connected workers with odd jobs. It wasn't easy. I'd come home from a late shift, my body aching, and still force myself to open that notebook. My handwriting grew sloppier as the nights dragged on, but my focus sharpened. Every small discovery felt like a secret key: a budgeting app that tracked pennies, a freelance writing gig that paid $5 an article, a survey site that offered gift cards I could trade for groceries. At first, it was almost laughable. $5 here, $10 there. But when I added it up at the end of the week, I realized I had $23 extra dollars. More than I'd had in months. It was tiny, but it was mine. I started setting rules for myself. No takeout, no unnecessary bus rides, no small indulgences. Every saved dollar went into what I called my escape jar. A glass jar I kept on the counter where I dropped crumpled bills and loose coins. Watching it fill, even slowly, gave me hope. One evening at the diner, a regular customer noticed me scribbling in my notebook during break. "You always studying something?" he asked, sipping his coffee. I hesitated, then nodded, trying to figure out money. He chuckled, but not cruelly. "Aren't we all? Just remember, it's a game. You either play it, or it plays you." Those words stuck with me. A game. Maybe that's what shifted my perspective the most. If this was a game, I could learn the rules. I could study, practice, and eventually win. The first real breakthrough came in the form of numbers. Once again, I was reworking my budget late one night when I realized I could consolidate my 2 credit cards into a single lower interest account. The process was frustrating, full of phone calls and paperwork, but when it was done, my monthly payment dropped by almost $30. $30 might sound small, but to me, it felt like air. That extra room in my budget meant I could save faster. By the end of the 3rd month, my escape jar had over $200 in it. $200 I didn't owe anyone. $200 that belonged to me. For the first time in months, I let myself smile without forcing it. But numbers weren't just saving me financially, they were saving me emotionally. I started to see patterns. I noticed how my mood lifted every time I hit a small goal, how writing things down gave me a sense of control, how tracking progress made me feel less like a failure and more like a fighter. Still, it wasn't glamorous. I was exhausted most days, juggling 2 jobs, sneaking library visits, eating dollar store meals. But something was different. The silence that had once felt like punishment now felt like strategy. No one knew what I was building. And that secrecy became my advantage. One quiet Saturday, I sat by the window with my notebook and realized I was no longer just surviving. I was beginning. Beginning small, beginning fragile, but beginning nonetheless. Numbers had become more than debts and warnings. They had become my map. As I closed my notebook that day, I ran my fingers over the escape jar, heavy now with change and crumpled bills. I whispered again, not yet this time, but something different. Soon. And for the first time since the night they laughed at me, I believed it. Soon. That word stayed on my lips, like a secret promise only I was allowed to hear. I repeated it while walking to work, while folding laundry at the diner, even while lying awake at night staring at the cracked ceiling of my apartment. Every whisper of soon carried me closer to the version of myself I was determined to become, the version no one thought existed. The real turning point arrived one icy morning. My hands were raw from the cold as I counted the bills in my jar. $412. Not enough to change my world, but enough to buy time, 1 month of breathing space if everything collapsed again. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was dangling over a cliff. I felt my feet hit solid ground. That same day, I spotted a flyer on the bulletin board at the diner, bookkeeping assistant needed, part-time, flexible hours, small business, apply within. My chest tightened. Numbers. I'd been living in numbers for weeks now, scribbling, tracking, calculating until it felt natural. Could I really take what I'd been secretly learning and use it out in the world? I tore the flyer down, folded it into my apron, and carried it with me through my shift. When the bell over the diner door rang and the lunch rush began, I could barely focus. Every clink of a coffee cup, every scrape of a fork against a plate, reminded me of what I had been running from: dependence, ridicule, humiliation. I wanted something new. That evening, I walked 3 blocks to the address on the flyer. A small office squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign above the door read, Clarkson and Daughters Plumbing. Not glamorous, but I didn't need glamorous. I needed a chance. Inside, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile looked up from behind a cluttered desk. Can I help you? I swallowed hard. I'm here about the bookkeeping job. She studied me, eyes narrowing slightly as though gauging if I was serious. Do you have experience? Not formally, I admitted, my cheeks heating. But I've been teaching myself. Budgets, tracking, spreadsheets. I can show you. She leaned back, considering. Then she slid a notepad toward me. Balance this set of numbers. No calculator. My hands trembled as I worked through the problem, pencil scratching against paper. It wasn't easy. The numbers blurred at one point. But I focused, breaking it down the way I'd taught myself late at night at my kitchen table. After 5 minutes, I slid the notepad back to her. She glanced down, then back at me. A small smile tugged at her lips. You're hired. Let's see if you can keep up. That was it. My first step into a new life. The hours were short, but the work paid more than the diner shifts. Better yet, it gave me access to skills I'd only dreamed of using. Real systems, real accounts, real trust. I learned quickly, double-checking everything, soaking in every mistake as a lesson. With that job came something I hadn't expected, dignity. I no longer felt invisible. I wasn't just a waitress scraping by. I was Sarah, the woman who kept the books in order, who could balance accounts with precision. 3 months passed, and my escape jar transformed. What had once been filled with loose coins now held neat stacks of bills. Over $900. Enough to replace my failing sneakers, but I didn't. Enough to buy a new phone instead of my cracked one, but I didn't. Every dollar stayed put, because I knew something bigger was coming. The real test came the day my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Sarah. The voice was unmistakable. My sister, Megan. I froze. The last time I'd heard her voice, it had been laced with mockery. You'll never make it on your own, she'd said while I carried my last box out of the house. Now her tone was softer, almost hesitant. We need help. The bills are piling up. Dad said you might know something about finances now. My breath caught. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. They were asking me for help? The same people who laughed as I walked out the door, who saw me as nothing but a failure. I steadied my voice. I've been busy, Megan. I don't know if I have the time. There was silence on the line. Then, please, just look at the numbers. We're desperate. I agreed to meet. But not out of kindness, not yet. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. That weekend, I walked into the family house I'd left behind. Nothing had changed, the same creaky steps, the same worn carpet, but the energy was different. Their laughter, once sharp and mocking, was gone. In its place hung tension, worry, fear. They handed me a pile of bills, envelopes stacked high on the kitchen table. I sifted through them, heart pounding. Past due notices, overdraft fees, credit card minimums triple what I used to struggle with. I looked up at them, my parents, my sister, her smug husband who once smirked as I dragged out my suitcase. Their faces were pale, their eyes searching mine for answers. And in that moment, everything shifted. The balance of power flipped. They were no longer the ones holding my future in their hands. I was the one holding theirs. Here's the truth, I said calmly, laying the bills back on the table. You laughed when I left with nothing. But now, every payment you need goes through me. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. For once, they had nothing to say. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I didn't whisper soon anymore. The time had come. The tables had turned. The drive home after that meeting didn't feel real. The cold night air bit at my cheeks as I walked from the bus stop, but I barely noticed. For months I had carried their laughter with me, echoes of the way they dismissed me, called me a burden, treated me as if I was disposable. And now, in a twist none of them could have predicted, they needed me. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, staring at the jar I'd once called my escape fund. It wasn't just a jar of bills anymore. It was a symbol of how far I had come, from sleeping hungry some nights to having the power to steady or shatter the very people who once cheered for my downfall. The next morning, Megan texted me. "Can you meet again? Dad says we really can't make these payments without your help." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I poured myself coffee, opened my little notebook, and thought through my choices. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about balance, about showing them the same vulnerability they had forced on me, only this time, with a twist. By the time I walked into their kitchen again, I had a plan. The pile of bills was even taller now. My father looked worn, his hands trembling as he pushed the envelopes toward me. "Sarah, just tell us what to do." I leaned back in the chair. "It's not just about telling you what to do. If I'm going to help, it'll be on my terms." My sister's husband scoffed, but Megan shot him a look that shut him up. I continued, "Every payment, every bill, every account, you send it through me first. I'll decide what gets paid, when it gets paid, and how much. If you don't like it, you're welcome to figure it out yourselves." The silence was thick. They wanted to protest, but the truth was undeniable. They were drowning, and I was the only one who had learned how to swim. Finally, Megan nodded. "Fine. Just help us." And so it began. Every week, stacks of envelopes arrived at my apartment. I'd spread them across my kitchen table, running the numbers like puzzles waiting to be solved. For each account, I made payments, small, deliberate, controlled. I wasn't cruel. I never left them completely stranded. But I never let them breathe easy either. They lived week to week, the way I once had, always waiting for my decision. And with each check I mailed on their behalf, I felt the scales balance. One evening, as I was finishing the books for the plumbing office, my boss peeked over my shoulder. "You've got a real gift, Sarah," she said warmly. "Most people don't see patterns the way you do. Ever think about accounting full-time?" Her words lit something inside me. For the first time, I didn't just see myself as a survivor, I saw myself as someone with a future. A real one. I took night classes at the community college, using part of my paycheck and carefully budgeting the rest. It wasn't easy, but the thrill of learning, of building something solid for myself, made the exhaustion worth it. Meanwhile, the dependence of my family deepened. Calls at all hours. "Sarah, the water company sent another shut-off notice." "Sarah, the bank fees are piling up." "Sarah, what do we do?" And always, I answered the same. "Send it to me. I'll handle it." There was a power in those words, but also peace. They had to trust me now, the same way I once begged them to trust that I could stand on my own. 6 months after I first picked up that flyer at the diner, I walked into the family house again. This time, not as the girl who left with a suitcase, not as the daughter they laughed at, but as the woman who controlled every thread holding their lives together. The kitchen table was cluttered with bills, just as before, but I didn't feel small this time. I felt steady, strong. Dad cleared his throat. "We're grateful, Sarah. Really, we didn't know you had this in you." I met his eyes. "You didn't want to see it. That's the difference." My sister shifted uncomfortably. Her husband didn't say a word. I laid down the final set of statements, neatly organized. "Here's the reality. You're caught up for now. But you'll stay that way only if you follow the system I set. No more reckless spending. No more ignoring deadlines. If you don't respect the plan, I stop helping." For the first time, they nodded without argument. Walking out of that house, I realized something important. My revenge wasn't about making them suffer the way I had. It was about rewriting the story they thought they knew about me. About proving, without shouting or begging, that I was not weak, not disposable, not their punchline. They had laughed when I lost everything. But now, every payment, every decision, every chance at stability passed through my hands. And that was enough. That night, as I placed the last stack of envelopes back in my jar, I smiled. It wasn't my escape fund anymore. It was my freedom fund. Proof that no matter how hard they had tried to break me, I had built something stronger in the ruins. I whispered one last word, not as a promise this time, but as a truth already fulfilled. Now,